She removed the pillowcase gently, taking care not to let it catch on anything. Beneath their shroud, the faces, blank and slightless, were placid. They looked like they could wait, ever listening, for eternity. Charlie switched them on and bent over to watch as they began to move their plastic mouths without sound, practicing. "Where?" said the first. "Here," said the second. "Where?" and the first said again. Charlie drew back. Something was wrong with the voice. It sounded strained. "Here," repeated the second. "Where?" said the first with a rising intonation, like it was growing upset. That's not supposed to happen," Charlie thought, alarmed. "They shouldn't be able to modulate their voices." "Where?" the first wailed, and Charlie stepped back. She leaned slowly down to peer under the desk, as though she might find an entanglement of wires that would explain the strange behavior. As she stared, puzzled, a baby began to cry. She stood at once, knocking her head painfully on the edge of the desk. The two voices looked suddenly more human and more childlike. One was crying, the other watching with an astonished look on its face. "It's okay," said the calmer voice. "Don't leave me," the other wailed as it turned to look at Charlie. "I'm not going to leave you," Charlie cried. "Everything will be okay." The sound of crying swelled, higher and louder than human voices should be, and Charlie covered her ears, looking desperately around for someone to help. Her bedroom had darkened, and heavy things hung from the ceiling. Mated fur brushed her face, and her heart jolted. The children were not safe. She turned back, but an acre of fabric and fur had somehow fallen between her and the wailing babies. "I'll find you," she shoved her way through, ripping on limbs that dragged onto the ground. The costumes swung wildly, like trees in a storm, and a little distance away, something fell to the floor with a hard clunk. At last, she reached her desk, but they were gone. The Halloween went on, so loud Charlie couldn't hear herself think, even as she realized that the screaming was her own. Charlie sat up with a loud, raw gasp as if she had actually been screaming. "Charlie?" It was John's voice. Charlie looked around with one bleary eye to see a head peering through the bedroom door. "Give me a minute," Charlie called as she sat straight up. "Get out!" she cried, and John's head shrank back. The door closed. She felt shaky, her muscles weakened. She'd been holding them tense in her sleep. She changed quickly into clean clothes and tried to brush her slightly tangled hair into something more manageable. Then opened the door. John poked his head in again, taking a cautious look around. "Okay, come in. It's not booby-trapped. Though maybe it should be," Charlie joked. "How did you get me here?" "Well, it was open and John trailed off as he took in the room around him, momentarily distracted by the mess. "I thought maybe we could go to breakfast. I have to work across town in about 40 minutes, but I have some time." "Oh, what a nice thought, but she said. "Sorry for the mess. It's my project. I sort of get wrapped up in it and forgot to clean." She glanced at her desk. The pillowcase was in place as it should be, the vague outlines of the faces just visible beneath it. It was just a dream. John shrugged. "Yeah, what's the project?" Language, sort of." She looked around the room curiously. Where had Jessica wandered off to? Charlie knew John would be suspicious of her sudden, unprotected interest in clothes shopping. I was hoping to avoid explanations. "Natural language programming," she went on. I'm taking computer programming classes. At the last moment, something stopped her from saying the word robotics. John nodded. He was still eyeing the mess, and Charlie couldn't tell what had caught his attention. She plunged back into her explanation. So, I'm working on teaching language, spoken language, to computers. She walked briskly to the door and peered out into the hall. Don't computers already know language? John called. Well, yeah, Shelley said as she returned to the room. She looked at John. His face had changed, stripped down to something more adult. But she could still see him as he'd been the year before, captivated as he watched her old mechanical toys. I could tell him. But then a look of alarm crossed John's face. He surged forward to her bed, stopped a few inches from it. He pointed. Is that Theodore's head? He asked carefully. Yeah, Charlie said. She walked to the windows and peeped through the blinds, trying to spot Jessica's car. So, you have been to the house? No, well, yeah, I went back once, she confessed, to get him. She looked back at John guiltily. He shook his head. Charlie, you don't have to explain yourself, he said. It's your house. He grabbed a chair from her desk and sat down. Why did you take him apart? She studied his face worriedly, wondering if he was already asking himself the next obvious question. What if it runs in the family? I wanted to see how he worked, Charlie said. She spoke carefully, feeling like she had to appear as rational as possible. I would have taken Stanley and Elliot too, but, you know, they're bolted to the floor? Pretty much, yeah, so I took Theodore. I'm actually using some of his components in my project. Charlie looked down at the disembodied Bonnie's head, onto its blank glass eyes, took him apart using his component parts. That sounds rational. She had gotten Theodore from her father's house just before school began. Jessica hadn't gotten home. It was early evening, not quite dark, and Charlie smuggled Theodore inside her backpack. She took him out, sat him on the bed, and pressed a button to make him talk. As before, there was nothing but strangled sound. Ooh, lie. The scramble up the cage traces of her father's voice. Charlie had felt a pang of anger at herself for even trying. You sound pretty awful, she said harshly to Theodore, who just looked up at her blankly, immune to the reprimand. Charlie ruffled through her bag of tools and parts, which hadn't yet taken over her side of the room. She found her utility knife, then went grimly to her bed where the bunny waited. I'll put you back together when I'm done. Right. She looked up at John now, saw the doubt in his face, or maybe it was concern, just like Jessica. Sorry, I knew everything's a mess, she said, hearing the edge in her own voice. Maybe I'm a mess too, she added quickly. She set the bunny's head down on her pillow and the part of his leg beside it. So, do you still want to see my project? She asked. Yes, he said, smiled reassuringly, and followed her to her desk. Charlie hesitated, looking down at the pillowcase. Just a dream. So, she said nervously. Charlie carefully squished everything on before unveiling the faces. Lights began to blink and fans began to whir. She glanced at John again and took off the cloth. The faces moved in little patterns, as if stretching out after walking. Though there is little they could stretch, Charlie swallowed nervously. You, me, said the first one. and Charlie heard John make a surprised step behind her. Me, said the second. Charlie held her breath, but they fell silent. Sorry, they usually say more, Charlie said. She grabbed a small object from the table and held it up. It was an oddly shaped piece of clear plastic with wiring inside. John frowned for a moment. Is it a hearing aid? He asked, and Charlie nodded enthusiastically. It used to be. It's something I'm experimenting with. They listen all the time. They pick up everything that's said around them, but they're just collecting data, not interacting with it. They can only interact with each other. She paused, waiting for a sign that John understood. He nodded and she went on. I'm still working out the kinks, but this thing should make the person wearing it visible to them. Not literally visible, I mean, they can't see, but they'll recognize the person wearing the device as one of them. She looked expectantly at John. Why? What does that mean? He asked, seeming to search for words. Charlie closed her hand on the earpiece, frustrated. He doesn't seem to understand. I made them. I wanted to interact with them, she said. His expression grew thoughtful, and she looked away, suddenly regretting having shown him the project. Anyway, it's not really finished. She edged to the door and glanced out. It's really cool, John called after her. When Charlie returned from the hallway, he gave her an odd look. Was everything okay? Yes, you should go though. You'll be late for work. Shelley approached the faces. She looked down thoughtfully at her creations. Then decided to reach for the pillowcase to cover them. As she did, the second face moved. It jerked back on its stand and pivoted, locking its blind eyes on Charlie's. She stared back. It was like looking at a statue. The eyes are only raised bumps on the molded plastic. But Charlie swallowed hard, feeling herself rooted to the spot. She started to blink gaze until John put a hand on her shoulder. She jumped, startling him as well, then looked down at the earpiece in her hand. All right, Charlie mumbled and pressed the tiny power button on the side of it. She placed the earpiece carefully on top of the mess on her desk drawer, then closed the drawer. The face was still for a moment, then slowly turned back to its place. It settled there, locked in a mirrored stare with its double, as if it had never moved at all. Charlie recovered them and switched them off, leaving them with only enough power to listen. At least, she looked up at John. Sorry, she said. Does that mean no to breakfast? I have plans this morning, Charlie said. Me and Jessica, girl stuff. Really? John said quietly. Girl stuff? You? Yes, girl stuff. Jessica squealed as she entered the room excitedly. Shopping. I finally convinced Charlie it's worth trying on clothes before she buys them. We might even move past jeans and boots. Are you ready? Ready, Charlie smiled, and John squinted at her. Jessica began escorting him gently out the door. Right, John said. I'll see you later then, Charlie. Charlie didn't respond, but Jessica gave a bright smile as she closed the door behind him. Ooh, excuse me. So, Jessica clasped her hands. Where do you want to start today?